As the New Orleans Saints continue and expand their offensive coordinator search, there are candidates out there who simply wouldn't work, including Jon Gruden. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, Ross Jackson, your New Orleans Saints expert, credentialed member of the media as a senior writer and reporter over at Saints News Network. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, we're looking at the offensive coordinator candidates that the Saints either should avoid or that simply wouldn't work. So we're going to go down a list of 3 to wrap up the show, but we're also going to be taking a look at offensive coordinator for the Buffalo Bills, Joe Brady, and why he wouldn't make sense for New Orleans. And we're going to lead it all off with Jon Gruden. Everybody's been focused on the potential of Jon Gruden joining the New Orleans Saints coaching staff, but offensive coordinator is unlikely to be the place where that happens. Let's break down why. Appreciate you, as always, for being an everydayer and for making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers will get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place any $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Jon Gruden, who the New Orleans Saints have been connected to basically for the last year, nearly calendar year at this point, would not be the right decision for their offensive coordinator spot here in 2024. Let's break down why. Let's start on the field. All right. We're going to get to emails. We're going to get to active lawsuits. We're going to get to that stuff here in just a moment. But let's start first with, or pending lawsuits. But let's start first with on the field. If what the New Orleans Saints want most, and this won't be the first time you've heard me say this if you're an everydayer, is to improve their offense by introducing schemes that are trendy and that are working around the NFL today. If they want to bring their offense into modernity and continue to keep pace with the NFL, then hiring Jon Gruden doesn't make sense. You're going backwards in that case. And look, I think that there are a lot of things that Jon Gruden did that still work in today's NFL. More motion, play action, all this other stuff. But Jon Gruden is not an offensive innovator. He's not somebody that's going to come in and create new waves. He's not a guy that's going to come in and help the New Orleans Saints get back to being at the forefront of the NFL. Can he help to improve your offense? Perhaps, but would he improve your offense consistently enough as a play caller to keep pace with today's NFL? I think the answer there is no. You need to go young. You need to go forward thinking. Going backwards into the NFL is not going to make the New Orleans Saints better as an offense and keep them up to speed as they move forward. They need to go in the forward direction like the rest of the NFL. What's coming? What can we do as the New Orleans Saints to innovate what the NFL is doing, right? That's where the New Orleans Saints need to be, which is one of the reasons why the Sean McVay, Kyle Shanahan coaching trees have been actively a focus so far for the New Orleans Saints when it comes to their requested interviews thus far. Shane Waldron, who's now been hired, it sounds like by the Chicago Bears, at least it's heading that way according to reports. So with that being the case, you can easily still look at him as a guy that was just on the list for the New Orleans Saints. As they did request to interview him, he was a Sean McVay guy. Zac Robinson, who's still on that list, quarterback coach, passing game coordinator for the Los Angeles Rams, he is a Sean McVay guy. Dan Pitcher working with Zac Taylor, a Sean McVay guy, makes Pitcher a part of the Sean McVay coaching tree. And then you look at the most recent request, Jerrod Johnson, a request that I broke down yesterday. That's going to be a virtual interview, by the way, which is not out of the ordinary for offensive coordinator hiring. Oftentimes, having virtual interviews for an offensive coordinator in today's day and age is perfectly normal. The outlier is bringing somebody in on a physical visit for their first interview. So that's what the Cleveland Browns are doing. Cleveland Browns are taking an extra step. Could the New Orleans Saints take that extra step too? Sure. But got to remember that a lot of these interviews, sometimes the decision about being in person and being virtual comes down to timing as well. So in any case, virtual interview is still an interview. Jerrod Johnson is somebody that's a part of the Frank Reich coaching tree. It's part of the Sean McVay coaching tree and isn't a part of the Kyle Shanahan coaching tree, thanks to his work with Bobby Slowick and D'Amico Ryans last year with the Houston Texans. Those are the forward thinkers of the NFL. That's the young talent of the NFL. That's where innovation is going to come from in the NFL. That's where the New Orleans Saints need to go at offensive coordinator. Now let's get to the off-the-field stuff. The distraction that a Jon Gruden presents feels very anti-New Orleans Saints, doesn't it? Feels like something that doesn't really fit in the culture shift that they're looking for. Distractions and, not being super committed to winning and all these other things. If there's anything going on around the New Orleans Saints that's not forwarding their chances to win, then it should be shut out. If that's going to be your attitude in one place, it's got to be your attitude unilaterally. And when you've got a dude that's sending racist, misogynistic, homophobic phrases and emails and all that stuff, sentiments in emails, that's a distraction. You got a guy that has a pending lawsuit or by that time, potentially a closed lawsuit, but has levied a lawsuit against the NFL. That's a little bit of a distraction, is it not? So you have to keep that in mind as well. The other thing the New Orleans Saints need to keep in mind is that really the last time we saw a head coach or former head coach, a coaching staff member, right, with an active lawsuit against the NFL, what was his reentry to the league? Brian Flores is somebody that was a head coach, has this lawsuit or had that lawsuit against the NFL. When he re-entered the NFL, he didn't re-enter as an offensive, or rather in his case, a defensive coordinator. He was a defensive coordinator last year with the Minnesota Vikings, but that's not how he re-entered the league. What did he do? He re-entered the league with the Pittsburgh Steelers under Mike Tomlin as a linebacker coach. So are the New Orleans Saints going to look at that precedent that's been set and say, well, we're going to do it differently and do the thing that Brian Flores was actively holding a lawsuit against the NFL for? Part of me doubts that. So no, I don't think that that's something that should be overlooked in terms of look at all this. And also, just simply put, the culture fit or the culture shift that the New Orleans Saints are looking for, is Jon Gruden going to be a fit for that culture? And I know that Mickey Loomis, New Orleans Saints general manager, said he doesn't like the word culture. I get that. I'm using that as the sort of phrase that is more, it's like the consensus, right? It's a consensus phrase that we use. But the tone of the organization, the idea of like the focus of the organization, whatever, is Jon Gruden going to be able to buy into that? Is Jon Gruden going to fit the culture of the New Orleans Saints locker room when you have guys that have done some incredible things, but also things that are very much juxtaposed to some of the sentiments that he utilized in those emails? You look at Cam Jordan being a guy that worked with the Jefferson Parish, or rather the New Orleans Police Department, on anti-bias training. You look at Demario Davis as a guy that has helped create legislation to allow nonviolent criminal offenders be able to vote here in Louisiana, to reduce the pipeline from schools to prisons, things like that. These are actively social justice driven incentives that are being driven by two of the most important people on your entire roster. And you're going to juxtapose that with a guy whose emails directly clash with that, guy whose sentiments directly clash with that. It doesn't make sense. And I understand that's the offensive side of the ball and the defensive side of the ball, but why create that division at all? It doesn't make sense. It just simply doesn't make sense. And I don't think that it would be a good hire for the New Orleans Saints, whether you're looking at it from the off the field stuff, which we just laid out, and I'm going to be like blatantly obvious or blatantly honest about, or even the on the field stuff. I don't see the value in Jon Gruden as your offensive coordinator in 2024. And you want to talk about distractions to finish this all off? How about the distraction for Dennis Allen, that everyone's going to look at Jon Gruden, or everyone would look at Jon Gruden being a part of this coaching staff, especially if he's hired as an offensive coordinator or something like that, being something that everyone looks at and goes, oh, the Saints have Dennis Allen's replacement breathing down his neck. Like, so many people would look at it that way. Why would you sign yourself up for that if you're Dennis Allen? Why would you sign yourself up for that if you're the New Orleans Saints? Bring him in as an offensive assistant, offensive analyst, like all those little things. And then if something happens, then something happens, right? When it comes to the head coach thing. But then you're making the decision at least a little bit less obvious that it's on the way, and you can create a little bit more dissent to the opinion. But bringing him in as an offensive coordinator right off the bat after being out of the NFL for a few years, oh yeah, that certainly says something about the future plans of the New Orleans Saints. Jon Gruden is the offensive coordinator, not the move in 2024. Coming up next, neither is Joe Brady, all right? Joe Brady is not only, and it's not really just about fit here, it's simply that it doesn't make sense. I'll tell you why as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by friends over at FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. America's #1 sports book. It's absolutely the place to go. The regular season has wrapped up, but the playoffs are still here. The big game is on the way. Tons to get in on when it comes to the NFL, but there's also NBA, MLB's on the way, and so much more all across the world of sports. FanDuel is the place to be to get in on a bunch of action. And right now, especially in a big game like you got coming up this weekend, the Detroit Lions headed to San Francisco to take on the 49ers. The Detroit Lions nearly touchdown underdogs in this one. Throw down a $5 bet if you're a new customer on those Detroit Lions. If you win, you get a good little bit of cash there. But if you don't, you still get $150 in bonus bets because new users get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place any $5 bet. That's $150 in bonus bets, win or lose, no matter what. So check them out today at FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. All right, family, it is a very unlikely situation that would ever bring Buffalo Bills interim offensive coordinator Joe Brady back to the city of New Orleans as the Saints' full-time or sole offensive coordinator. Let's discuss why. Appreciate you, as always, for making Locked On Saints a part of your day and being an everydayer here on the show. Don't forget to also go and check out the Locked On Sports Today YouTube page where the first ever national 24/7 sports stream is up, YouTube's first ever. So be a part of history today by heading over to Locked On Sports Today and subscribing on YouTube. So look, Joe Brady is one of those names that keeps getting tossed around and I get asked about all the time. I think that the original or initial excitement around that is kind of maybe has quelled a little bit, but I still get questions about it. So I wanted to include Joe Brady in the conversation today on guys that just don't make a lot of sense for the New Orleans Saints. And unlike Jon Gruden, who doesn't make a lot of sense for them right now because of his fit with the organization, the team, the distractions, all those other things, there's just simply no reason why Joe Brady isn't the offensive coordinator for the Buffalo Bills next year. Like, they moved on from Ken Dorsey. Joe Brady stepped into the play calling role as the offensive coordinator, and I do think that their offense got better. Could they get past the Kansas City Chiefs? No, that's still their big roadblock no matter what. But I do think that there was a good example and easily demonstrable examples of how it is that Joe Brady did help to improve that Buffalo Bills offense. And if you're Joe Brady and you've got the opportunity to work with Josh Allen and not Josh Allen, unless it's Patrick Mahomes you're going to go and work with, it's Josh Allen that you're choosing, right? It doesn't matter who the other options are. Maybe you get a little excited about Lamar Jackson, right? Something like that. But outside of that, like, Josh Allen's one of the top quarterbacks in the NFL, and he's going to be that next, and is going to be for a while, sort of like the guy that's listed along with Patrick Mahomes, along with Lamar Jackson, along with a couple other guys that are going to be the upper echelon of NFL quarterbacks. And unless the Buffalo Bills do something unexpected and don't appoint him and remove his interim tag and make him the offensive coordinator, why would he leave that? So until he actually hits the market, it doesn't make much sense to say, oh yeah, well, the Saints should go out there and pluck Joe Brady. Would it be cool? 100%. Would it make the Saints better? Without a doubt, Joe Brady would make the New Orleans Saints better as their offensive coordinator. But it's not necessarily about that, is it? It's about the opportunity. And I don't think that the opportunity is going to be there unless the Buffalo Bills massively mess themselves in not appointing him as their offensive coordinator moving forward. If he does become available, you have to wonder why. And so I guess that would be the Buffalo Bills signaling that they think it was more Josh Allen than it was Joe Brady, but that would be a tough decision to make. And I think that it's not going to be because of what he did in Buffalo, right? Like, he's going to get his opportunity one way or another. And I think he's going to get that opportunity there with the Bills. The other thing that would be interesting to me, though, is that it is a little bit of a roll of the dice in that he wasn't like a core. Like, I think that there's a lot of Michael Scotts in this situation. Office reference for you, that sort of over-romanticized the relationship between Joe Brady and the New Orleans Saints because of the success he had in 2019 as a part, not a play caller, not a coordinator, but as a part of the success of those the greatest season of college football we've ever seen, the 2019 national champion LSU Tigers. Thank you very much. And outside of that, I mean, I think that like the existing relationship between him and the New Orleans Saints here, it wasn't what people think it was. He wasn't a part of play drafting. He wasn't a part of play calling. He wasn't a part of play design or anything like that. He was an assistant to the head coach, and that was his role. And I don't even mean that in another office reference, like that's the title, right? So I think that when you look at the relationship between Joe Brady and sort of the way that people kind of over romanticize it and use that as sort of this draw for why Joe Brady should come back and restore the glory days of the New Orleans Saints offense, I think there's a little bit of a disconnect in terms of what the actual relationship was there. It wasn't tumultuous. It wasn't bad. It wasn't negative, but it wasn't like oh no, they really lost the whiz kid here in Joe Brady. Joe Brady became a whiz kid over the course of his time. And then really you got the opportunity to see it. Didn't get to see it when he was in Carolina. I don't think that was necessarily his fault. He was under Matt Rule, if we're being honest. But I do think that you get to see his genius over in Buffalo. But why risk that genius by returning to a place that there might be some unfair expectations of you revitalizing by backsliding? And so this is the other thing that I think creates a little bit of a reason why maybe it's not the best landing spot for Joe Brady as an offensive coordinator. In Buffalo, there's no preconceived notion. There's no, well, you were with, as the Saints organization, well, Joe, you were with us when we were doing this. Let's do this again. There's none of that. It's, hey, you're the guy, you saved the offense coming in as the interim offensive coordinator. This is your ship, run it, when it's Sean McDermott talking to him, right? But here in New Orleans, doesn't it kind of feel like there's a little bit of a risk of the New Orleans Saints kind of playing a little bit of revisionist history there by accident, right? Not necessarily on purpose, but sort of being tempted into the revisionist history of like, hey, when you were here and Sean was doing X, Y, and Z, like we're really comfortable with that. You know how the New Orleans Saints are. They're about comfort. They're about consistency, cohesion, all those other things. So yeah, like they rolled with Pete Carmichael over the course of the past 2 years because they wanted to try to maintain something that was Sean Payton-esque without Sean Payton being there. Now you get Joe Brady in there who worked with Sean Payton too. Well, can you do it? And I don't think that that's fair to a guy like Joe Brady. And I don't think that would be the right move for the New Orleans Saints, asking for something that they don't actually want. Like what they want is to move into tomorrow's NFL. Move out of yesterday's NFL on the offensive side of the football. And I worry that a little bit of that comfort could potentially set in when it comes to the idea of a Joe Brady, if for whatever reason the Bills screw this up and don't give him the OC job over in Buffalo, that the Saints could potentially be tempted into a spot that actually wouldn't allow Joe Brady to be that whiz kid, wouldn't allow Joe Brady to continue to sort of find, develop, and recognize the genius that we saw that came in after Ken Dorsey and made things better in Buffalo. And if you wanted a reason not to have Ken Dorsey be the guy that comes in to New Orleans over the course of the offseason, I think an in-season hire of him actually at the beginning, like during the 2023 season, might have made sense. But here, when you have all of these, again, forward thinkers in the NFL, don't go to a guy that's had major questions around his personnel groupings. Don't go to a guy that's not using enough motion, that's not using enough play action, that's not moving the pocket and stuff like that. You just left that guy. You just parted ways with that guy. Bring up a Ken Dorsey or bring a Ken Dorsey back to the NFL through New Orleans. You're going to end up having the same conversation again, and you're back in the offensive coordinator search in 2025. And probably the head coaching search in 2025, because if your offense isn't getting better, the team's not winning, then it's going to be tough for Dennis Allen to hold on after a third year. So I don't think that it would be in Dennis Allen's best interest to go that route either. So sorry, I just threw it. I promise you Lanyap. I always promise you Lanyap. So I added Ken Dorsey to the list on a whim here. But yeah, no, I just don't think that the Joe Brady thing, as exciting and as cool as it feels, realistically in practice turns out being what it is, right? It turns out being what it actually turns into. That's my concern around the idea of Joe Brady as the offensive coordinator. And again, I just don't see why he leaves Buffalo. And I don't see why Buffalo changes the tide on him and decides to go a different direction when things worked so clearly well for them at the end of the season, as they are one of those few examples of making a change at coordinator midseason and getting much better production and winning games after making that change. I think that is such a rare thing that you find in the NFL. Shout out to the Pittsburgh Steelers for finding it as well, moving on from Matt Canada. But I think that those circumstances are so rare that when you find it, stick with it. That's your next guy. And I think that Joe Brady will be the next guy in Buffalo, making him not a good fit, obviously, for the New Orleans Saints to put all their eggs into. But we'll see. Coming up next, let's take a look at three more guys that really don't need to be on the New Orleans Saints radar or won't be available to be on the New Orleans Saints radar for their 2024 offensive coordinator opening. We got that coming up for you as we wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our friends at Game Time. Game Time takes all the guesswork out of buying tickets for your favorite events, whether you're talking football, basketball, any kind of sports, concerts, comedy, whatever it is that you're looking for. It's the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with every purchase. You can see the view from your seat before you buy. They've got fantastic deals. It's like they're obsessed with finding ways to save you money, all the way down to zone deals where they'll actually pick the seats for you and you save big on those tickets as well. And right now, it cannot be any better. So take all the guesswork out of buying your tickets with Game Time today. And right now, Game Time users can get $100 off a ticket to the big game with code Vegas100. Terms apply. If you're going to the big game, this is the way to do it. Just download the Game Time app, use that promo code VEGAS100, and you're going to get $100 off a ticket to the big game. Or if you're not going to that game and you want to go to something else, use promo code LOCKEDON, LOCKEDON, for $20 off of your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. Cliff Kingsbury, Eric Bienemy, and Jay Gruden are also three more candidates that don't make sense for the New Orleans Saints, won't be available for the New Orleans Saints, or outright, in one case, would just be a bad hire by the New Orleans Saints. Don't forget, we are your team every day. Make sure you come back for tomorrow's episode. We'll keep you up to date with everything going on around the offensive coordinator search and take a look at where the Saints need most to improve when it comes to their passing game beyond just protection. We got that coming up for you in tomorrow's episode. All right, so look, I've got three candidates here for you: Eric Bienemy, Cliff Kingsbury, Jay Gruden, as three guys that just simply don't make sense for the New Orleans Saints or won't be available for the New Orleans Saints. Let's talk Eric Bienemy first. I was a big sort of proponent for Eric Bienemy as the potential head coach for the New Orleans Saints a couple years ago when they opened up that conversation. But look, it's unlikely that he's going to be anywhere out when it comes to the Washington Commanders. Yes, I know Ron Rivera is gone. Ron Rivera now interviewing for other defensive coordinator spots and things like that. And so anytime that you have a change at anytime you have a change at head coach, there's the potential that the coordinators change as well, right? Like that's a potential thing that could happen. So we could see that happening with Eric Bienemy. But look, Eric Bienemy is also an in-house candidate to step into Ron Rivera's role as the head coach. So he could be a guy that they interview and that they continue to move along with and all this other stuff. And maybe the New Orleans Saints want to move a little bit faster than that, right? Like instead of getting into that whole conversation later on. And even if Eric Bienemy doesn't get the head coaching gig with the Commanders, does that mean that he leaves as the offensive coordinator? Not necessarily, right? So I don't know that Eric Bienemy is going to become available. If he does become available, then he becomes a good option for New Orleans, without a doubt. But it just doesn't feel like, much like the Joe Brady situation, he's even going to be an option for the New Orleans Saints. Doesn't feel like that ends up making a lot of sense for New Orleans. And right now, like, you're getting all these interviews in, you're starting to talk to guys and stuff like that. You want to be able to bring guys in for second interviews, all that. You want to meet with them probably at the Senior Bowl. I imagine the Senior Bowl next week is going to be a big recruiting opportunity for all that as well. I will be at the Senior Bowl. I'll let you know if I see them talking to anybody, all that good stuff. But I don't know if you want to wait for somebody else's head coaching process to wrap up before you make a decision. I did ask Mickey Loomis the timeline in terms of how quickly they wanted to move on this. They want it to be a longer process. They want it to be a shorter process. How they want to go about it. Washington Commanders said that they were going to have a quote unquote rapid process when it came to hiring their offensive coordinator. They don't even have their head coach. They don't even have no, that's not been the situation for them yet. And so I don't know. I don't know how quickly that's all going to move. If Eric Bienemy does hit the market, sure, but it feels like it's time for Eric Bienemy to get the head coaching opportunity. And if he gets it in Washington, it's all the more comfortable for him. So I don't even think he's going to be a part of that conversation. And look, they have an opportunity to potentially find their next quarterback here soon. So there's really good things potentially on the way in Washington, especially with the rest of the NFC East kind of collapsing right now. I just don't see Eric Bienemy being out in Washington and even available to the New Orleans Saints. Cliff Kingsbury, the USC, a senior offensive analyst and quarterback coach over there. I don't know why he leaves the college ranks, if we're being honest. And genuinely, I don't think he'd be necessarily a great hire for the New Orleans Saints either. He had a complete meltdown. He kind of had that. He didn't have a meltdown, but like his system melted down in the NFL level, wanting to go with that sort of heavy like spread offense and all that. It's so counterintuitive to what the identity of a Dennis Allen team is, to what the identity of the New Orleans Saints and what they want to be. They want to put the ball on the ground. They don't want to live in empty sets. They don't want to live in 5 wide, air raid, all this other stuff. Like imagine an air raid offense in New Orleans. You just can't picture it, right? And I don't think that's a bad thing. I don't necessarily feel like that works in the NFL if you can't put together a run game in the meanwhile. And for that air raid system, you probably want a more mobile quarterback than a Derek Carr because you got longer developing things and stuff like that. Derek Carr just took a beating this past year. Don't put him through that again in an air raid system this year. He's not unathletic at all. Like he moves a lot better than I think people expected him to. He moved a lot better than I thought he would. You saw him week 18 try to put the wiggle out there on somebody on the QB power that they ran with him. But I mean, he's not Kyler Murray. He's not Caleb Williams. He's not Jalen Hurts. He's not, those types of guys. He's not Baker Mayfield, right? Just trying to think about, people that have run in those types of systems in the collegiate ranks, at least as well. I just don't see the Cliff Kingsbury thing panning out if the New Orleans Saints were to go that route. And again, I don't know why he leaves the college ranks. His play style, his coordination, his scheme, his system works so well in college. Might as well stay where it works, dude. Like it didn't work in the NFL. Move along. You're good. Like you're making a ton of money with the USC. You're fine. Like go ahead, do your thing. I just don't see it happening here in New Orleans. And I know Cliff Kingsbury has been one of those ones that pops up on lists every now and then too. And another guy I've been asked about pretty often is Jay Gruden. Jay Gruden's been out of the NFL since 2022. He's been out of the head coach / coordinator game since 2020. As last year as a head coach in 2019, that was with Washington. Then he was the Jaguars offensive coordinator in 2020. Outside of that, he's been the offensive consultant in Los Angeles in 2022 last year, and that didn't go great that year because Matthew Stafford was dealing with a bunch of injuries. Jay Gruden's out here like battling with, previous, past quarterbacks, Robert Griffin and all that on Twitter and stuff like that. Like he's been at home doing all that kind of stuff. That's just not a good hire for New Orleans. Like there's nothing about Jay Gruden that says, yeah, that's the dude when you want to take your offense into tomorrow, when you want to take your offense into today in 2024, going to go and pluck somebody that hasn't called a play in the NFL for 3 years probably isn't the right guy. And I know what you're thinking. Well, Ross, the Saints are, looking at guys like Jerrod Johnson and Zac Robinson and all this who have never called plays in the NFL. That's fine. That's advancement, right? We're talking about advancement in that situation. Think about every time that you've applied for a job. How often is it that you were already doing that job somewhere else? Or you were applying for a promotion, new responsibilities, new things? Like it's the same process. You sit in an interview, they ask you questions that translate to, can you do this effectively? They have you display it, show it to them and all that. They look back at your previous employment history and then they measure, all right, do you have the experience and the understanding and the wherewithal and all this other stuff to be able to say, yeah, okay, well, now he can be an offensive coordinator in the NFL. That's a different situation when you talk about advancement. When you're watching somebody that failed at it in the NFL and then going, yeah, that's the guy. No shot. No shot. So I just don't see it. And look, I might have egg on my face here in, a month or whatever. If the Saints, Jay Gruden's the offensive coordinator, we'll have a lot of fun on the show if that's the case, right? I mean, goodness. But yeah, no, I don't see any of those 3 guys being guys that are real candidates for the New Orleans Saints, despite the fact that they're bigger names and are names that still to this day I'm being asked about. So I wanted to make this episode to kind of give you an idea of like, hey, here's the guys that I don't think are necessarily good fits or don't really match the situation. Like the opportunity that the Saints have open doesn't match what they might be looking for, like a Joe Brady or like an Eric Bienemy and all that kind of stuff. And in my opinion, should be like a Cliff Kingsbury who should just stay in college where his stuff works. You know what I'm saying? So that's the way that I look at it when it comes to the New Orleans Saints. And those are guys that I think the Saints should pass on, at least for 2024. All right. I appreciate y'all, as always, making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day, every day. Don't forget, for your second listen, go and check out Jake Madison over at Locked On Pelicans, Caroline Fenton over at Locked On LSU for the latest on your New Orleans Pelicans and your LSU Tigers. Thank you very much for making us your first listen of the day, every day, making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me and the show. As always, if you see me, please say hi. If you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how you're momming them. And trust Who Dat Nation. I'll holla at you.